I hereby call the special school committee meeting to order, it being 8:02, Thursday, September 14th, 2023. Again, if we could please stand and salute the American flag at this time. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I do need to establish a quorum. I'll call the roll. Mr. Sullivan? Mr. Homer?
Here.
Vice Chair Ehlers?
Here.
Mrs. Rivas-Mendez?
Here.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Here.
Ms. Azak?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan?
Here.
Chair is here as well. We've established a quorum. I just want to clarify, I know there's been a lot of questions, the reason why it's an 8 p.m. Start tonight as opposed to 7 p.m. We wanted all members to be here tonight. A few of them had some prior time commitments, so that is why we're here at 8 o'clock. The other question is why we weren't going to be doing it tomorrow night at 7. Out of respect for our Jewish population, tomorrow starts Rosh Hashanah at sundown. We will, again, be meeting next Wednesday, not Tuesday, because that's Election Day. We took a vote. It will be next Wednesday, which is the date of September 20th, back here in the Little Theater, Georgia and Romm Little Theater, and that will be a 7 p.m. start. I also want to, on behalf of the entire school committee, thank everybody for being here. There's a lot going on tonight, including a Brockton High football game and also the open house. Typically, in past practice, for special school committee meetings, we do not have hearing of visitors. However, we are truly transparent. We want to hear and listen and learn. So we have hearing of visitors. That's why you'll see that the posting was revised as of today. And at this time, agenda item 4 is again hearing of visitors. I do need to read the following. I was neglectful. If I could read this into the record, please. This meeting will be held and will be accessible to the public via Brockton Community Access, Brockton Public Schools website, which is www.bpsma.org, YouTube, and also Comcast Channels 8 and the 1071 HD version. The public can access this meeting via the following link, www.youtube.com/TheBrocktonChannels. In regards to hearing of visitors, which is the agenda item right now, it will be the same process and procedure. There will be a clock. Each member is allowed to speak 3 minutes. Attorney Spotterfoot will be respectfully keeping track of the time. We do have 2 members of the community that have signed in. First one is Michaela Latour, from the city of Brockton. Michaela, please.
Hello, my name is Michaela Latour. I am the Director of Youth Soul, the Youth and Youth Allies Organizing branch of Brockton Interfaith Community. And tonight I'm here to represent the Brockton Coalition for Education Justice and those organizations and community members who have signed off on our demand letter, which include the Collaborative Parent Leadership Action Network, or C-PLAN, who organizes Brockton's Parent Advisory Council, the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, Co-op Matters LLC, Restoration Community Action Ministry, or RCAM, DART Coalition, Resilient Roses Respite, Brockton Workers Alliance, and the Citizens for Juvenile Justice, as well as many community members. And many of whom could not be here tonight, as many of us learned of this meeting today, and many people only a couple hours ago. But seeing that one of the main agenda item for the public meeting is the discussion of process to select an independent auditor, we want to stress the importance to the community that community members be part of that selection process to ensure total transparency in the process, as we know that you have committed to an outside auditor who does not have a connection to Brockton. But we also know, with no accusation intended, that while auditors may not have public-facing connections to Brockton, they may have private connections to Brockton. And so the community would like to be part of this to ensure transparency and accountability across the board. And we urge you to consider that in your decision making and discussion this evening. And would like to just thank those school committee members who have responded via email to the demands that were sent out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person is Mary LaCivita, please.
Hi, I am Mary LaCivita. I'm the parent of a junior here at Brockton High. And with all the discussion about auditing and the budget and money and everything, I just want to speak up for the parent volunteer group that Mike Thomas was talking about last year. I have talked to probably a dozen parents tonight. I've talked to plenty of parents over the last week. Maggie Pinney and I are trying to get the parent volunteer group going this year at the high school. We have lots of ideas, such as the parent and volunteers. So while I understand there are a lot of people and there are a lot of issues, that a lot of frustration, I just don't want the kids in the practical work, particularly free volunteers with experience, to be able to help. I don't want that to get lost in the shuffle. Because I want my kid to have a good 2 years, and every other child here deserves that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes hearing of visitors that signed in. We will now go on to Agenda 5, which is discussion of process to select an independent auditor at this time. Members of the committee. Mr. Homer, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure members of the school committee are aware there was a motion made in city council chambers on Monday by Councilor Farwell about a proposed audit undertaken by the city solicitor to examine finances in the school year 23 and the previous year, school year 22. Hearing that proposal, it brought to mind a couple of questions about the sources of funding for conducting an audit on the school department side. I know for our budget proposal for the current year for 24, I don't know if we have money that we've set aside, what money we would be using to spend for an audit from our 24 budget. It sounds like the city council proposal would mean that there'd be two different audits, or two people working at the same purpose from two different directions. I don't think that looking only at the 23 school year and the 22 school year would answer all the questions that the community had raised. I think people in the community had questions specifically about the budget cuts that we had to make, the position cuts that we had to make for this year, and why there was a budget shortfall, where that came from. And I think there was a lot of misunderstanding around what happened with COVID money and ESSER money and funding that expired, and what that meant for the future years. I was suggesting, I would like to suggest too, that we may want to revisit the idea of proposing that if the city council wanted to fund an audit or support an audit, that they would maybe look back even further and go back and include the 2021 school year and the previous year before that, the 2019-2020 school year. And that would encompass the COVID year, money that was provided by the federal government and the state during the pandemic, and bring us up to date and provide a better picture for the city. And I also think too that having the city council propose to undertake an audit might also alleviate some of the public's concern about participation among the school committee in conducting and selecting somebody to do an audit. If that's taken up by the city council and the elected representatives of the city and the populace, that might sit better. So it's just something I wanted to raise that point and possibly consider recommending to the city council that if they were going to undertake an audit, that they would also include the 2 years prior, 2020 school year and 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Homer. We do have the CFO here. He's going to be speaking at the next agenda item. But if nobody objects, Mr. Clarkson, do you mind? It might not be a fair question, but Mr. Homer asked a question relative to cost. on the school side and even on the city side. Would you have any thoughts just off the top right now in terms of that?
Certainly. Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer. I actually considered this question earlier today, and given the nature of an audit, there are actually several budget lines within the city's budget that would be appropriate for a cost like this. Of course, it's wholly dependent on the amount that this would cost, but it is an appropriate use, obviously, of public funds. And we certainly do have money within my budget for what we call contracted services, within the mayor's budget, even within the law budget. So we're certainly prepared to collaborate with the school committee and fund such an audit if it's done citywide.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Any other membership inquiries or questions at this time? Mr. Rodriguez, please.
I know I made the proposal last meeting to include 3 members of the public to the subcommittee for the selection. And I know there was a question if it's going to be labeled as a subcommittee or is it going to be an advisory committee. Just my feelings on this is that if we do move in that direction, that these 3 individuals, that, you know, whatever the process to select them, they can have no ties to any elected official, never donated to another elected official, never supported an official publicly. So it's a clean slate. And also when it comes to the question of who is going to be, you know, mirroring or shadowing these auditors, those will be the only 3 individuals, and it's only for the selection process only. And just to clear the air, school committee members are not part of the audit. We are not downtown going through paperwork. That's why we are hiring an audit team. So those that are making those accusations, you got to know the process. Before you speak, do the diligence and do your homework. So I just want to know, like, where are we standing on adding the 3 individuals so that the public can know that this is transparent as possible. Nobody here is hiding anything.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Attorney Spotterfoot, did you have a thought on that?
Sure. So since our last meeting, I've looked into the proposal. Right now, the only motion that's been accepted by the body was made about a week and a half ago to create a subcommittee of the chair, the vice chair, and 2 members of the committee. If we go either the subcommittee or the subcommittee is typically just members of the committee. An advisory committee could include members of the community in addition to members of the committee. If we go the advisory committee route and do want to include other individuals than school committee members, we would need to make sure that we have a clear application process and criteria and selection timeline to select those individuals. I don't think appointment in this situation would make a lot of sense, and that will take time. Is my only concern with that approach. I think it's completely legal, but it will take time to get the application out there, allow people time to apply, evaluate those applications, conduct interviews, and then schedule meetings. The same, and with both the advisory and the subcommittee structure, neither is authorized to make decisions on behalf of the committee. They would be making recommendations back to this body about who to appoint. And typically, they would bring forward more than one candidate to allow you to look at those candidates and make a decision as a body of the whole. An alternative approach is to have the committee as a whole, and this is just for the selection, not for the overview of the audit, but have the committee as a whole make the selection. It would allow for a faster process. I think in any scenario, you're going to want to make sure that you put an application timeline out there to allow anyone who's interested in submitting a proposal, create an RFP. This isn't a expenditure that would be subject to your typical 30B procurement because it's an accounting expense. So you're allowed to create a bit more of your own timeline here. So you would submit an RFP, allow people time to submit a proposal, and if you do choose to go the full committee route tonight, you could set those parameters tonight about what you'd be looking for in an application. If you choose to go the subcommittee or advisory committee route, I would suggest that you spend the time tonight formulating who would be on that subcommittee or advisory committee, and then how would you go about the process of selecting the members of the community, and perhaps a timeline, and whether you'd want to include any members of administration, city government, et cetera, on that advisory committee as well, which you certainly could. The options are pretty open-ended for an advisory committee.
Sorry to interrupt.
Ms. Azak, please.
I thought at the last meeting, originally the motion, Mrs. Ehlers made the motion to have the chair, vice chair, and a couple of committee members, but I thought you took back your motion, and then we made a second motion to have the committee as a whole on the committee to find the audit. We did,
We did?
I vaguely remember we did, because it just made more sense to have, rather than have them come back, report to the committee, have the committee part of it from day one, and then that way we can just, we have to get moving on this. Time's of the essence, so we do, the longer it's taking us, but I vaguely remember that. I'm not sure if any other committee members do. I know our minutes aren't out yet, but I thought, because I remember I seconded the motion, and then Mrs. Ehlers took back her motion and then added the committee as a whole.
I think we'd have to reference the minutes. I recall that the motion you took back was to add the two, it was originally the chair and the vice chair, and then the revised motion was to add 2 other members of the committee. I don't know that it was ever revised to add the full committee, but I may be mistaken.
Sorry, excuse
Vice
me.
Chair, please.
Yes, I think you're right, Sarah. I see where the confusion is, but first the motion was for the chair and the vice chair, and then I retracted that, and then we opened it up to have a chair, vice chair, and 2 additional members. I don't think we got to the point where it was a committee of the whole. But but at first, I mean, I honestly I can understand the confusion.
Okay, it just,
Yeah.
there's just, if we can get clarification on that, I was under the assumption the whole committee was going to be part of the, the process, and then we were going to have some community members get involved as well, just so we can get the process going rather than have, 2 or 3 people, then come back, report to the committee. I mean, we're already going into October. I mean, we're in mid-September by next week. So again, time is of the essence, and we really need to, like one of the members said, we need to start focusing on get this going so we can focus on other things that are going on at BPS. Again,
No, Joyce, you are correct, because the motion, when I made that to add 2 extra members on the first initial meeting, the last meeting, we made it a committee of the whole. And that's when I motioned to add 3 more members of the community to the subcommittee as an advisory, if that's the course that this body wants to select. And if it's gonna slow down the process, I would still like for the committee, with however we deem necessary legally, to select 3 members, and they could be shadowing or monitoring this audit process.
Any other questions on this in terms of, I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan.
I agree with
Wait, sorry.
Ms. Azak. I mean, we need to get on this right away. We don't know these community members. We would have to vet them out. And, we don't know them. We know all the people here, so I'm not for that.
let me clarify, I wasn't against it. I just think as a committee as a whole, and then have some community members.
Okay.
We should have some community involvement, so transparency.
Vice Chair, please.
Which I totally agree with, but we're saying, like, we're contradicting ourselves. We can't have speed and add community members at the same time, because we're not gonna get that. And that's, I think what Attorney Spatafor was saying, is that it's totally fine if we include community members, but that is totally gonna slow down this process, because that's a whole process that we've never developed, we've never been a part of, like, we're gonna have to create it. And so, I'm with you, and I'm with Mr. Rodriguez. I think at the very least, it should be a committee of the whole for all of us. But I'm also concerned about the fact that if we include community members, they have to go through HR, we have to file RFP, like there's a whole other process to that is gonna slow this down and not get the answers to the community as fast as we want. And so I think we have to consider that. I think the expedience of getting answers to the community is, in my opinion, more important, because everything we're going to be talking about moving forward is going to be on this camera. We're going to be 100% transparent because we're all committed to that. And so I think that that's where we have to think is, are we looking for speed, or, because we can't have it both ways.
Mr. Rodriguez?
I'm not looking for speed, I'm looking for accuracy. We're 14 million in the hole. I know it's time is the essence, and we're trying to figure out exactly what happened, but this isn't something we're trying to rush. I want to make sure that we have accuracy to see how, what happened. So this isn't something it's a speedy process. We want it to be done in an accurate way, that we know exactly what happened.
Mrs. Rivas Mendez, please.
Also, to echo what Mr. Rodriguez is saying, I think we can't also be stuck on this too. We need to start talking about budget 2024, and like I forget her name, I'm sorry, but she spoke. She's part of the parent volunteer group. She spoke.
Mary LaCivita.
Thank you very much, Miss Mary. We need to also focus on what matters too. I know this is a huge part of what we're doing, but this is not all of why we are in these seats. So we have to make sure that we're looking forward too, and not just get stuck on this.
Thank you, Ms. Rivas Mendez. Attorney Spotterfoot, could you just explain to us best guess timing? If we do, I think we should do a confirmatory vote, because my memory's a little different, and I think it was discussed all 7, but I don't know if it was actually a formal vote. So for belts and suspenders, you do a confirmatory vote again. But if and I'm not opposed to it at all. I mean, it's open, transparent. But I'm just trying to figure out how do we allow 2 things: an audit firm to apply, right? The timing frame on that, right? It has to be independent, external, no connections to the city of Brockton at all. And then how do you do an application process to get community members interested?
So I think we're talking about a couple different things. So as an initial point, I think the committee needs to determine how you're going to go about just selecting the firm, and whether or not you want to do that as a committee of the whole, which would not include members of the public, in that just the selection, right? You would do it openly, you would interview the candidates in public, there'd be public speak, you'd set the parameters for what you'd be looking for in an application. You would typically give, about a week, 10 days for people to apply, and then have a public meeting where you would hear proposals from those who apply. And then the second thing I'm hearing is the involvement in the community and the oversight of the audit. I think that certainly is a possibility. In whatever path we choose with regard to the community involvement, we would want to make sure that too is an open process available to all Brockton citizens, that they have opportunity to apply, that there's a parameters of what we're looking for, what the time commitment is going to be, because often these audits take place during typical working hours, and it could be quite a lengthy time commitment. My experience is something like this could be 400 to 600 hours. And so if you're going to have somebody with the auditors all that time, that's a very expensive, very big commitment for anyone to make. And so that would be something we'd have to look at is what is the role you're looking to have community members serve. I think as an immediate matter, it's determining what is the method by which you're going to choose the audit firm. Is it going to be a full committee, a subcommittee, which would be what you've already voted, at least to my recollection, of just a group of the school committee members, or would it be an advisory committee, which would include some school committee members and potentially others, whether that be members of the public or others from, maybe not from Brockton, et cetera. You can really, subject matter experts, et cetera. An advisory committee could be possible for the oversight of the audit, and that might be a pathway forward to allow more meaningful involvement, where the audit selection process will be completely public.
Thank you. If we as a 8-member body at least start the process to have applicants, and then the applications come in, then that would give us time to have community members to vet them out? Like, can you kind of time manage it the same process? Give people firms that would apply, and then that would give this body time to get the community members that would, because it's going to be an open, the applicants are going to stand up here and we're going to question them, right?
Correct.
Is there anything that would prohibit this committee to also have 3 extra chairs, and those community members could also question those people?
I think you could allow that. Whether or not they would have a vote, I think is something that would be, I think the ultimate decision is that of the committee. Those community members can make a recommendation, but the ultimate decision whether to expend school committee funds for this purpose would just be that of this group. But yes, Mr. Mayor, you absolutely could think through a timeline which would allow 3 community members to be part of the interview process with the full committee. And we typically probably do that at a special meeting to vet the, just so you could dedicate it to that purpose, to vet the candidates who would make proposals.
Thank you. It's the will of the committee. Any additional questions at this time? Any thoughts in terms of next steps, motions?
Mr. Chair, just
Mr. Homer,
Thank you.
please.
Just to go back, I hate to beat a dead horse. I know I had asked the question. I know Mr. Clarkson had responded about money on the city side for the city to be able to afford an audit. I'm not 100% clear that that answers the question of how the school committee would fund their own audit. And if we don't have it budgeted in our budget and we need to go to the city council to ask for more money to conduct our own audit when they're preparing their own audit, I still feel like we're working at cross purposes there. And I know that they've introduced this other motion on Monday this week, which comes after we had already begun our discussions. So I do think it's kind of thrown a little bit of a monkey wrench into our planning. We could make a lot of plans to try and propose new things and invite people onto an advisory committee and make steps like this, and then find that city council's still going to continue with their own audit, or would they stop? I don't know what the process would be like. I've never experienced that, and I don't know what it looks like when the city council and the school committee are both trying to accomplish the same goal and how that gets resolved. And I don't know if, as chair, I don't know in your experience, Mr. Mayor, if you have any insight into how that might possibly work out.
So it was a late file before the full city council referred favorable back to the finance committee, which again includes all 11 members of the city council. So once it's at finance, again, finance would typically be next Monday, but past practices, because of election, city council doesn't hold FinCom, doesn't hold finance that night. So now you're talking the next finance will be in October, which school committee woman Azak's right, it's not too far away. But I couldn't opine on, I mean, the chair is the council president. I don't know how long, if it would be ratified and voted that night. And then when it does come out of FinCom, finance, either favorable or unfavorable, it has to go back to, again, the full city council for a ratification vote. So it would be best case, in my humble opinion, if it's a favorable vote coming out in the first finance in October, potentially it would be ratified in October. But again, I'm not on the city council anymore, so I don't know. Mr. Rodriguez, please.
I mean, this is the school department, and we're talking about the city council. That's bothering. I know we're trying to have a huge umbrella over the whole city, but this body right here should be focused on the school side. City side is the city council and Mr. Mayor. So if city council wants to have an audit, let them take care of that. If they want to include it into one, they're going to be sharing a piece of the pie when it comes to funding. So that's it. You know, I don't know if we're going to be doing a collective meeting. I know they want us to go in front of them, so I don't know what answers they're looking for, because everything they could do is just watch it on YouTube and they can see what we're talking about, just like any other public member. So I don't think that we should be referring to the city council. So city council has their own agenda over there, so we need to focus on what we need to do here as a body to make sure that we select the audit. If they want to piggyback, then they could do their due diligence as city councilors.
Again, I think it goes back to the point of we have to approach city council for our budget. So if we don't have our money for us to do our own audit, we're gonna have to communicate to city council. That's the point I'm making.
You know, point taken, but we're still the school committee.
Mr. Clarkson, again, this might not be a fair question, and you're next on the agenda, but in terms of, and you and Dr. Cobbs have been really diving deep on the school finance component, but in terms of the questions that came up in terms of funding an audit authorized by this body on the school side, would you have any thoughts right now in terms of funding, or it would be premature to figure that out at this time? Ms. Azak, could you just, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. If it's a policy priority for the school committee, then it certainly can be funded through the FY24 budget. One of the things that I'll talk about in the next agenda item is that working with the finance team here at the schools and with Dr. Cobbs, we've created what I think is a preliminary but very effective budget tracking tool. So, as I said with the city side audit, it is of course dependent on the cost. But should this body decide that funding an audit is a priority, then it's an appropriate use of FY24 funds, and we can fund it from the school budget.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. What's the will of the committee?
One more question.
Mr. Rodriguez, please.
So I can understand this. So we as the school committee are going to select an audit team to do the school side. That's what our main focus is. This is where the black cloud is. Whatever's on the city side, I haven't been addressed in what they're looking at. So as city councilors, they want an audit done on the city side, but they have no authority on who we're selecting. So there's like this push and tug going on of like who has more power and who doesn't. This is the school committee. If they want to do it, that's their cup of tea. You know, we're not interfering on what they're doing. You know, I understand they have to vote and we have to work together, but it's our audit. They want to piggyback, then that's something that they have to do on their own.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. The will of the committee at this time?
I'll make a motion that the Brockton School Committee form an advisory board to include 3 members of the community for selection of a recommendation to the full committee to vet out the auditors.
Second.
Oops, sorry.
Motion was made by Mr. Rodriguez. It was duly seconded by both Mrs. Rivas-Mendez and Ms. Azak. And just on the motion, Mr. Rodriguez, again, if you could just clarify that one more time. So it would be this entire body creating an advisory,
An
which would
advisory
include
board
3
to
community
include 3
members.
members of the community to vet out the audit team only for a selection process, which would come back to the full committee for a full vote.
And just again, one more question. If this passes, and I'll support that, would that also, because the original vote was in consultation with legal counsel, right? So legal counsel, Sarah, via her firm, will need to, not the advisory board, but they will need to work with getting the application process for the 7 to 10 days. So do you envision it that if this vote passes, that we could also authorize her to at least start the process to see who's even interested, what firms are interested, or do we wait until we get this ratified?
I think we should start soliciting the firms now.
Does that sound right to you? Okay,
So we already up, ahead of the game.
okay.
So we have.
Sorry.
The only other suggestion I would make to clarify the motion is how many school committee members you would want on that advisory committee? Or are you thinking everybody would be on the advisory?
Everybody on the advisory committee,
Okay.
all 7 members and the mayor,
So eight
8 body.
plus the 3 community members, total of 11. So there's a motion on the floor, and it was properly seconded. I have to do a roll call vote, I'm sorry, on the motion,
Before-
Ms. Rivas-Mendez.
Before we vote on the, how does that application look, so people know? Because we didn't vet on that. We didn't talk about what the application is, when we'll send the application. How do they have access to the application to give the application? We didn't talk about that stuff. What questions will be on the application?
Sure. And I think that's a valid, what the process would be to select the community members. And is that, I don't want to misstate, are you asking about the application process for the community members or for the audit firms?
For the community
Community
members.
So I think we would want to make sure we would probably publicize the application on our website, as we would typically do. And then the questions, I think we would have to talk through. What would we be asking of people, apart from their name and their residence in Brockton? You know, I know there's a concern about making sure people are unaffiliated with the elected officials, so maybe that's a question. Their interest, to state why they're interested in serving, that they have the capacity to commit to the time that's going to be required of this process. And then I think the other question is who's going to, how are those applicants going to be vetted? I would assume the committee as a whole, if that's the advisory committee model, would vet those applicants before and then select those community members before you move forward with interviewing the audit firms. But I think those are excellent points that we probably should clarify tonight if that's the will of the committee to go that route.
So we wouldn't vote on, would that be a second motion?
I would think it would make sense to assess whether the committee is moving forward with the proposal made by Committee Member Rodriguez, and then you can talk about the specifics of what that would look like.
Okay. Any other questions on the motion? We do have a motion that was properly seconded. Any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, the roll call. Mrs. Sullivan? Mr. Homer?
Yes.
Vice Chair Ayers?
Yes.
Ms. Rivas-Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Azak?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Mrs. Sullivan?
Yes.
So it does pass unanimously. Now we will, so that passes. So we will work with legal counsel on that. But the discussion now should be exactly what Ms. Rivas-Mendez had inquired about. The actual process for community members to apply to be considered one of those 3 community members on the advisory board. The will of the committee, please?
I think it should be 3 questions. It shouldn't be like a long application, because if there's an interview involved in that, 3 questions, like 3 basic questions and then maybe like a short answer question. And the 3 questions were the ones that we talked about: the name, your residency in Brockton, have you have any affiliations with any elected officials, similar to what Mr. Rodriguez said earlier, and then like a short answer question, like, I don't know, we can vet that last question, but I don't think it should be like a long application.
That's typical.
And would we accept other languages? If people, you know, are we just being biased to English, or are we going to allow people to apply in Spanish and Portuguese, Haitian Creole, and in other languages?
What I would request is the application would be in the 4 major languages, right? Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean Creole, Spanish, and English. But again, that would be up to the committee, but that's typically what we do on the city side as well. And then if there is anybody that wants to apply that speaks an additional language, Key Lingo is the company that we use for translation services. We could work with those folks as well. Mr. Rodriguez, please.
One thing that we have to really stress is that making sure that they are really residents of this city and that they don't reside in Canton. That's one of the biggest points, because you can circumvent residency. So that's one of the concerns, but we have to make sure that these people are actually residents of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Ms. Azak.
Just to follow up with Mr. Rodriguez, I mean, there's basic info: telephone bills, electric bills, gas bills. So like, you know, sometimes employees have to show proof of residency. It's just going to be basic check form. And I'd also like that we're all present when we see who the applicants are before they're brought in for interviews before us, that we're all present. I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but we'd like to see who the applicants are. And make sure if for some reason someone did not qualify to step up, if they didn't provide information, like we as a committee should, again, the public is asking for transparency. This is the first time I've seen where we're bringing in the public with us, so we just want to make sure that we're doing this right and we're giving everyone a fair shot, just so not someone feels like they're left out. So as far as like the process, obviously it's going to be during a public meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Azak. Any other committee, Mr. Rodriguez again, please?
I think when it comes, to, I mean, like, the whole interview process, so, you know, they're putting in their applications, they're vetted out, they know they meet the criterias. You could have 50 people that we have to select from, that can be on this. I think it should just be a lottery. Assign each individual a number and pull it out of 3 numbers out of a hat, and those are the individuals. Because I don't want to sit here and say, I want that individual over that one. Just pick it out of a hat. There's 50 people that are qualified. They could sit on this advisory. Everybody's got a number, and just pick it up a lottery.
Attorney Spotterfoot, you represent other municipalities. Are you aware of how other cities or towns in the Commonwealth have done it? Have they done it, what Mr. Rodriguez said?
Truthfully, this is a novel concept for me. I don't think, typically the advisory task force model is more subject matter based experts or people who have a particular interest, like when we're building a new school or something along those lines. I don't think the model you're suggesting is a bad, legal or anything like that. What I was thinking is perhaps I could come up with some options to present to the committee at our meeting on Wednesday, along with a sample application form that we could share, as well as a sample RFP for the audit process, so that way we could publicize both at the same time. I do think it's going to be important to note to applicants that they will be on public meetings and their names will be shared publicly, so that folks are aware of that when they're signing up to be part of this.
My last question would be, when we select 3 members, do you have kind of like an alternate member if someone got sick or something like that? Kind of like on boards and commissions here in the city of Brockton, we have permanent members and then we have alternate backup members. Is that something that we should contemplate?
I think it's a good idea. This, again, I want to clarify, this advisory committee is just to select the audit firm, right? So it might be 2 to 3 meetings, maybe tops. So I do think to make sure that you're moving forward with some expediency, having an alternate may not be a bad option.
Do we need to revise Mr. Rodriguez's initial motion, or just do a new motion relative to, so it would be 3 plus 1 alternate from the community?
I think a revision to the motion is fine if you're willing to make one.
On the motion to be revised to include an alternate member to the advisory committee to selection of the auditing.
So motion made, is there a second to that?
Second.
Second. Any comment on the motions? Because we have a formal motion properly seconded. So the motion would be to have the original vote, which was us, plus 3 community members, and then the revision would be, and there'd be a 4th, but he or she would just be an alternate in case one of those 3 could not participate for whatever reason. No other questions? I'll read the roll, please. Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mr. Homer?
Yes.
Vice Chair?
Yes.
Mrs. Rivas Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Azak?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
The chair is a yes as well. That passes unanimous as well. So, Attorney Spotterfoot, do you think that between now and on Wednesday, you'd be able to give us some work product that would be helpful for this?
Absolutely. I'll be prepared to bring forward a proposed selection plan, timeline, and application documents for the meeting next Wednesday.
Any questions for Attorney Spotterfoot? Any addition? Oh, Mr. Sullivan, please.
Yes, you had mentioned earlier that the community members would not have a vote. Has that changed now? They will have a vote?
So in the advisory committee, they would be able to voice their opinion and vote with the group about what the recommendations would be. And then that group is going to bring, which will be you all plus the 3 committee members, community members. And then once that, so that you all would have an equal vote, the community members would have an equal vote in the advisory committee setting to advance, I would recommend at least 2 candidates, audit firm candidates, to the full committee. The final vote about who to appoint will be that of the full committee alone.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any additional questions relative to that agenda item? Thank you. We'll move on to the next. So Troy Clarkson's the city CFO. I have asked that going forward, there'll be a regular agenda item dedicated to this, where Troy will come to give an update. And then at some point, there'll be a CFO on the school side. But it would be, and we talked about this in the past, it would be, I think, very, very helpful, of course, right now, to have Mr. Clarkson come here on a regular basis to give us updates. So if nobody objects, it will be a standing agenda item, and you'll see that as we move forward. Mr. Clarkson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Troy Clarkson, the Chief Financial Officer for the City of Brockton, and I'm pleased to be with you tonight. What I'd like to do is just briefly to go through some of the steps we've taken in the last couple of weeks and share with you some of the steps we intend to take, and then share with you some information on the fiscal '24 budget. Obviously, depending on your format, whether during the presentation or at its conclusion, I'm happy to answer any questions. Let me say from the outset that my objective in assisting the school committee and the school department is to serve you and the public with transparency, with accountability and professionalism. And I pledge that to you today and in the future. And so that's how we've tried to approach things since working closely with the mayor and Dr. Cobbs, we took a greater role in oversight of the school finances earlier this month. So since that has occurred, we've had obviously several meetings, not only within the school department and the city, but with external stakeholders. We've met several times with the Department of Revenue. I met with them on a couple of occasions with members of my team and the school team, and the mayor and I have also met with the Department of Revenue to discuss our plans both for quantifying and satisfying the fiscal year '23 deficit, and then looking forward and ensuring that the schools are on sound financial ground moving forward in FY '24. So those are parallel tracks that we're taking right now. They are equally important, and they're receiving, I think, equal efforts. We do have some thoughts about how best to address the FY '23 deficit, and we will continue to work with the Department of Revenue and closely, obviously, with Dr. Cobbs and his team on addressing that. And I'm happy, as these meetings progress, to keep you updated on how that's occurring. We've also had some discussions with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, known to you, more familiar as DESE. The mayor and I, along with the solicitor, had a meeting with the commissioner, and they have pledged their full support. They will be providing support in the form of finance professionals that will be assisting us and the school department in both, again, assessing the FY '23 issues and looking forward to this year. At DESE's expense, they're sending down a consultant called Open Architects, and we have a kickoff meeting with them on Monday to just start to have some conversations about what that support will look like, so we're very grateful for that. I have met several times, and the mayor has joined me for discussions with CLA, our outside auditor, and so they are actively engaged with us. That was the first call we made when we were made aware of the FY '23 deficit was to CLA. So they are engaged in discussions with us, again, both on the solutions and how we look forward.
Mr. Clarkson, if I could, just on the DESI, again, Commissioner Riley has committed, they're paying for it, which was great, and we thanked him profusely. Monday, the 18th, is when they're going to have physical interaction, but they will be here, the folks that they're sending down will be here, boots on the ground, on the 25th. Just wanted to make, I think you missed that
Right.
component.
Yeah,
the
that's an
25th.
important clarification, right? So the first discussion with them, the introductory meeting is on the 18th, and then they will actually be physically present here providing assistance. In addition to that, there has been some expression of interest out there for people to act as interim CFO. That's an issue that you as the committee will be dealing with, but Dr. Cobbs and I have had the opportunity to meet at least one person interested in that position, so I'm sure you'll hear more about that. But I'm just trying to give you an idea of the scope of activities that we've undertaken in the last couple of weeks to address some of those issues. The school, obviously, as you well know, not only expends money from your voted FY24 budget, but there are grants and revolving funds, so we're also working to get our arms around those numbers and to try to understand the status of those funds better as well. So, one of the most pressing issues, particularly given the discussions over the last several months about enrollment and funding for FY24, was what is the status of the fiscal year 24 budget? So one of the things we've done, and one of the documents that I've presented to you, is a preliminary budget tool to analyze spending thus far in FY24. I should tell you that we are refining that on a daily basis. What we're trying to do, what we are doing, is actually taking that report down to a very granular level so that we will be able to tell you on a daily, weekly, monthly basis the spending not only in the categories that you see in this report, but by school. When you voted the FY24 budget, you voted some very broad budget categories. Those 4 categories were personal services certified, personal services non-certified, ordinary maintenance, and travel out of state. And so the approximately $229 million that you voted were in those broad categories. What this report does is breaks it down. And I know school committee members, you know this, but some of what I say I'm sharing for the benefit of the public that's either here or watching at home. The software that we use to manage the budget is called Munis, and the budget that's in Munis reflects not those 4 broad categories, but the much more detailed categories that are in the detailed budget that you considered back in May, I believe it was. In May, yes. So we've taken the data that exists in Munis, and Munis works well with Excel, and so it exports it into what is a complicated but fairly straightforward spreadsheet. And again, we'll be refining this, but I wanted you to have something. I know one of the important tasks before us is to restore public trust. And so, depending on the will of the committee, we're happy to share this not only with you, but with the public in a format or with a frequency that you determine. But what this spreadsheet shows you is the spending by those categories in that budget from back in May, and it targets the budget by monthly spending. So each month, and we have a similar tool on the city side that we've used for quite some time to be able to track how city spending occurs. And so each month, if you're spending exactly the amount of money you should spend about 8.3% of your budget every month. So what this spreadsheet does is it tracks that, and you can see in July, you should have been 8.3% total spent in the budget, 16.7% approximately in August. And today, the number you see at the top right-hand of the spreadsheet is not what you should spend at the end of September, but what should have been spent as of today. So we wanted you to have up-to-date, accurate information. And so if you turn just quickly to the back page, to the final line in that budget, you'll see a number of 18.57%. So what that tells us is that as of today, should you had spent to the penny on the FY24 budget, you should be a little less than 21% expended. Thus far, we are 18.6% expended. So we are spending below the number that will take you right to the amount that's been approved. One of the reasons for that, I believe, is that since Dr. Cobbs took over as interim superintendent, he, working closely with me and with the mayor as chair of the school committee, have instituted pretty significant cost containment measures so that we understand to great detail what the amount is that's being spent in the school department every day, every week, every month. That includes institution of position control, where previously the authorization for filling positions was dispersed throughout the leadership. Dr. Cobbs, with my support, has instituted a policy that he will be the final say on filling positions. And so that will require the certification from myself or a member of the finance team that the funds are available to fill that position. In addition to that, there's a similar policy that's in place on contracts, and so we have instituted a policy where contracts, in order to be executed, there has to be a certification that funds are available, and Dr. Cobbs will execute those. When we get an interim CFO in here, and the folks, the DESI contractors are here, you know, one of my hopes is that we can institute some written policies and procedures so that everyone, including both the staff over here at the schools and my team over at City Hall and the public, are aware of exactly what those policies and procedures are and how those resources are allocated. Let me just take a minute just to, and I don't want to delve into too much detail, but I just want to explain this spreadsheet. I'll say it one more time. We are developing, I think, a more detailed spreadsheet. This was just finalized this afternoon. I have reviewed it with our team, but no, I will be honest with you, not as much as I would have liked to review it. But the interest of transparency, to me, was greater than holding on to it and reviewing each and every line. But what we did do is review several of these lines. And so you can see that some of those numbers in that right-hand column exceed 20.82%. So some of those budget lines have already been spent beyond what they should be. Remember that the categories that you voted for the budget were those 4 categories. So legally, those 4 categories can't be expended. The individual budget lines actually can be, so long as the overall spending doesn't exceed what's been appropriated. And I know that can be a little confusing, but in the days and weeks and months to come, happy to get into more detail on that. But it's important to note that, so you do see some numbers that are greater than 20.82%, but your overall expenditures are below where they need to be. Just a couple of examples of some of those numbers and what's behind that, what's behind those additional expenses. For some services, the city will expend money at the beginning of the year, or what we call encumber money, for purposes of making sure the money's there for the whole year, so it looks like there's been a ton expended, but it's just making sure that you're setting aside sufficient funds so that they're available. Just for instance, for Constellation and National Grid bills, there's a blanket purchase order for legal services, so that there's sufficient funds throughout the year to pay Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, and Lehane. Same thing for telephone, for building supplies, for janitorial supplies. So some of those items are for routine expenses. But still, they're tracked so that as the year goes on, and if we're at January 1st, and we should be at exactly 50%, and that number is still elevated beyond where it should be, it gives us an opportunity to pause, to meet with those department heads, to talk about how much they've spent and how much they might need to finish the year. And again, that's a process that has greatly benefited the city and has allowed us to finish fiscal year '23 with a fairly significant surplus that could become in very handy and be helpful as we look to address the school deficit. So that's the overarching process that we're trying to implement here, is to have a really good handle on what the spending is on a regular basis and be able to respond to you and to the staff to fulfill their needs, to educate the children of Brockton, but also to be responsive and make sure that we're doing that within our means. I think one final note on the report, because there is one number that jumps out pretty significantly. There was a purchase made, if you see on that last page, under vehicles. The school department did purchase some buses, some more buses at the beginning of this year. Anticipating that question, I did have a member of the school finance team print out that purchase order, so I have it here if anyone wants to see it, but there was from Anderson Motors in East Providence, the purchase of 6 additional buses. I believe they're the 35 passenger with child restraint school buses, so those are the smaller buses. So that number obviously is significantly over what was budgeted, but because it's in that category where, as long as you don't overspend the total that you've appropriated, that money could be expended within the FY24 budget. So that's an overview. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm grateful to be able to provide this additional support to the city and to the schools, and I look forward to working closely with you as the days and weeks unfold.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Members of the committee, for Mr. Clarkson, I'll start with the vice chair, followed by Mr. Rodriguez, please.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Really quick. You mentioned that once we get to January, we're 50% in the middle of the year. That's where we have a chance to reflect and kind of look at, whether we're overspending. This here, right now, at the 20.82%, why wouldn't we do that at the end of Q1? Why would we wait until January?
You most certainly can, and I anticipate I and/or whomever comes on board as the interim CFO will be making reports to you at every meeting. So your opportunity to reflect is ongoing for sure.
Okay, and then one quick question, I definitely recognize the vehicles, it's the first thing that jumped out to me, but there are also several other ones that are almost over 100%. And so I guess my question is, the encumbered money, can we assume that will catch up with these percentages because the appropriate amount has been budgeted for those line items?
I can tell you from experience, it generally does. I mean, for some things on the city side, and I have a fair amount of experience in municipal budgets outside of Brockton before I came here. That is a very common practice where for things like professional services or things like telephone or electricity, that the money is encumbered at the beginning of the year. It's still important to watch it. So yes, those percentages will catch up, but as you get to the final months of the year, it's really important to make sure that there aren't other payments looming that are going to put you over that. And that's why constant oversight, I think, is really important.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mr. Rodriguez, followed by Ms. Azak, please.
Thank you. So this is extracted right out of Munis?
Yes.
Or is this like manually entered in a different program?
No. So this Munis exports this data directly into Excel.
It's interesting because, sitting on the accounts review, this is what I was asking for. The whole body was asking to see this, and we were told that it couldn't be done. So that was mind-boggling that I'm sitting here now for something I've been on for quite some time, that it wasn't provided, and it's sitting in front of me right now. So I'm not sure, is the city side doing something different versus the school side, or they just didn't want us to see this?
I can't answer that last question, but what I can tell you is this is a format, a little different, but a format that we've used for some time. And Munis is the most common municipal finance software. It's not the only one, but it's the most widely used, certainly in the Commonwealth, and I believe across a good part of the nation. So because it's so widely used, it's designed to work well with Microsoft products.
And the other one, I know on the state you have the open checkbook. You can see where it's going. Is this a mechanism how you have this drafted up that we can have online so the public can just hit the button and see exactly what's being spent in, in the trend itself? Or is that something how would that work?
That's a great question.
Would it be a
and-
city side, or would it just be just the school side?
So the open checkbook is a tool that we use, and it has not been updated, I will tell you that, in some time on the city side, and we're working on that. But for those unacquainted, the open checkbook is something that provides up-to-date, this sort of information on spending. One of the first things I said to you this evening was a pledge of transparency. So the answer is yes, we most certainly can find a way to make this information available to the public because it is public information. The best format to do that, whether or not we post a static PDF of the spreadsheet or find a way to reflect it, I'll work with Dr. Cobbs and with both the city and the school IT folks to figure out the technical answer to that question. But if the desire of the school committee is to have this information regularly and readily available to the public, most certainly we can do that.
Yeah, I would love to see this so that, the public knows that, okay, this is what they're spending, this is where the trend is, because maybe somebody in finance can screw up and somebody in the public, hey, listen, you guys, so this is a great tool. I love it. I mean, it's, like I said, I'm just in awe that what I've been asking for almost 2 years is sitting in front of me right now.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Clarkson, before we go to Ms. Azak, could you just share with the committee again the color coordinations that we do on the city side that you're incorporating on the school side? If you get to a red color, you know it more than I do.
Yeah, it sounds elementary, no pun intended. But what we do, the version of this that we use on the city side, so if you, and we have many departments, if a departmental spending on any given day is greater than that number that it's supposed to be that you see at the top, the cells for that spreadsheet actually turn red. And that is designed so that I or the mayor can look at that spreadsheet and immediately see where we need to do some work, rather than, it's just a tool to help us focus on where the problem areas might be. And then what we do on a monthly basis is, if anyone is in the red so far this year, then we'll meet with them and sit down and develop strategies of how they're going to finish the year. There are some, for instance, on our side, probably 85, 90% of the debt budget is probably already paid this year, right? Because debt payments are usually made up front. So I won't sit down with the treasurer and review that, because we know that he's going to be at 90%, by August 30th. But all of the others, it's really an effective tool to monitor the spending on a regular basis. And not just for our purposes. I think the departments then begin to think about their spending and what they're spending on, because they don't want to have to come to sit in my office and answer as to why they're overspending. So it's a really helpful tool for everyone to really make sure that we're staying mindful of what resources we have.
Ms. Azak, please.
Thank you. Actually, Mr. Rodriguez touched on my question. Is just, I know we've been asking for this, and I know the accounts review has mentioned it quite a few times. So this is a lot easier to review, and we can keep track of this. Just one item. Just the one thing is, over the years, everything's usually, combined. A few different, like for example, we have other contract services. Can we break those down so we can see what the other contract services are, rather than just a general other contract services? Just so we can just keep an eye on those and see where they fall under.
Most certainly, and I mentioned that earlier. So we're refining this tool on a regular basis and hope in a fairly short amount of time to have a report for you that breaks these expenses down by school, so you can actually see to that level of detail where those resources are being allocated. It's very early to talk about FY25, but I just want to plant a seed for you. So I'll go back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago, and that is that when you voted the budget, you voted some pretty broad categories. I will defer to council, but I believe it's within your discretion when you vote that budget to vote it at a more granular level. I would not suggest, and I've had this discussion with boards of selectmen and councils before, that if you voted at the line item level, you will spend all of your time voting to transfer money at every meeting. But I think there's a space somewhere between voting 4 lines, and having 200 lines where you can have a level of detail in the budget that you're comfortable with when you vote it, and one that doesn't tie up all of your time dealing with transfers. And so we can talk about that as time moves on, but I think there's some opportunity there, I think, when you set the budget to do it in a way that you're more closely controlling how those resources are allocated.
Thank you. I just know from people have been reaching out, and we're concerned with FY23, but a lot of people are now concerned with FY24. So thank you for breaking this down for us so we can at least keep an eye on this to make sure we're not going to get into the same problem that we did with FY23. That, and I appreciate it. And I know I mentioned it earlier. Thank you for having this tonight, but if we can have these at least the day before, so that way we can get our questions. I appreciate you rushing to get this to us tonight, but moving forward, if we could at least get like 24 hours just to review, have our questions, and really get time to absorb the information you're providing. But we appreciate the time that was put into this. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, of course, moving forward, we can, whenever I'll work with Dr. Cobbs, when your packets are put together, then we can provide it as of then, or send you an email the day before, because again, this is, it can be updated and uploaded every day. So I'll work with the committee and with the chair to figure out the best way to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Azak. Mr. Sullivan, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Clarkson, for coming here tonight and taking care of all this stuff. And this question is for the people at home as well as the people here. Our bills are being paid on time right now? There's no problem at all?
Yes. That simple answer, yes. I think we are, both Dr. Cobbs and I, and I certainly don't mean to put words in your mouth, Dr. Cobbs, but we're being very cautious, and so more deliberate at the beginning of this process to make sure that we have a handle on what those bills are and where they're being paid from. So I would say in this early period, things might get paid a little more slowly than they typically are, but that does not mean the resources aren't there. We just want to make sure we're establishing processes early on to make sure there's a sufficient internal review before those bills are approved to be paid.
Thank you. And the second question is, I was under the impression that we had 2 budgets, a net and a non-net budget. And the reason I'm asking is these buses would come under the non-net. It shouldn't be on this sheet.
So that's an excellent question, and thank you, because I was going to mention that, and I neglected to. There are 2 appropriations from the city, one for the net school spending and one for the non-net. I asked that question, it was actually this evening, of both the school and the city finance folks about how Munis in this report is reflective of those 2 different appropriations. And so I will be refining that, and I'll have a better answer for you. I believe that this report is encompassing of both non-net and net, but I need to be certain of that. So I don't want to offer you an answer and guess. So let me go back and confirm that, and in future reports, we'll be able to answer that definitively for you.
Just so you know, Mr. Clarkson, that I was told that the school buses, the entire process is non-net. The city would pick up the entire tab, including the buses. And now it's on this one.
And I believe that has been the case. In fact, both the mayor and I were involved when that first tranche was purchased, we used non-net spending that had not been allocated because the buses weren't running during COVID to buy that first wave of buses. And so I believe that's the case. What I think this spreadsheet reflects is both net and non-net, but I want to confirm that for you before I say that definitively.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Ms. Rivas Mendez, please.
So you mentioned that in regards to positions that need to be filled, specifically teachers, you and Dr. Cobbs have been working through that. Now my concern is, right now we're at, from what I'm reading, 17.36% on the teachers. I just, because we're still not, we haven't filled in certain positions, how do we avoid what has occurred in the past of these like crazy layoffs that we happen? Because what I'm not understanding is, why are we laying off and now we have to hire? Like, where is the miscommunication here? Where we budgeted for something, we're jeopardizing people's lives, right? Because people depend on jobs for a reason, like we all do. And then now we're having these vacancies that we need to talk about in regards to hiring them.
That's an excellent question. I'll speak to you from experience in general, and then try to answer that question specifically to Brockton. But certainly in an organization as large as the Brockton Public Schools, even when you have layoffs, there are other vacancies that occur through retirements, resignations, people who go to teach or work in other districts. So the vacancies that exist here are from a variety of sources. So positions that were eliminated or not filled because of the necessity to adjust the staffing levels to the enrollment, but also for those other reasons. So one of the other reports that has been created by the school finance staff that we're refining is another report that when we have it refined and completed, I will absolutely share that with you as well, is a comparison of positions this time now to this time last year, and looks at trends in positions so that we can more effectively try to answer that question. We were actually discussing that concept in an email thread today, myself, Dr. Moran, Dr. Cobbs, and some others, to try to quantify that very fact and figure out, of the vacancies that we have, how many are from that deliberate reduction in force, how many are from positions that people left. And so we're working to gather that data so that we can accurately answer that question for you on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Rivas Mendez, just as a follow-up to that, when we had all the hearing of visitors, Kim Gibson, the president of the BEA, and the other members spoke. And before we concluded, I pledged to meet with them that week with Mr. Clarkson. They were talking about the Chapter 70. And we met with them, and I asked point blank, because there's a lot of rumors out there about all these people that were ripped are coming back. I then did a meeting on Monday with Dr. Moran and Dr. Cobbs in my office as well. So what Mr. Clarkson is saying was a follow-up email today. I want to know, out of the 130 union members that this body voted to RIF, there should still be 130, you know what I mean, from a financial standpoint. So again, Dr. Moran said some people have resigned, some people have gone to other districts, some people have retired, but we're going to have her, if Dr. Cobbs doesn't disagree, we're going to have her come on Wednesday night to give us that breakdown, because from a financial component, we actually need to know that, right? We voted here 2 different tranches, and it was tough to do. We're talking about people's livelihoods, but we voted people being riffed, right? So those numbers need to be consistent, because that's what the budget was based upon. So Dr. Moran is crunching those numbers. I asked her to clarify it even further, so she'll be here on Wednesday with that information as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Any other questions for Mr. Clarkson at this time? Mr. Clarkson, thank you.
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you. So we'll see you again Wednesday night. We have agenda item 7, and it's executive session, and I need to read the following to the record because there's 4 different components. Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 2021-1, to discuss the reputation, character, physical condition, or mental health rather than professional competence of an individual, or to discuss the discipline or dismissal of or complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual. It's relative to open meeting law complaints. The second matter would be Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21-2, to conduct strategy sessions and preparations for negotiations with non-union personnel or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel relative to the acting superintendent. Number 3 is Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21-3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. Number 4 is, and that's the last one, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21-7, to comply with or act under the authority or any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirements. Open meeting law, general law, chapter 30A, section 22FG, for the purpose of reviewing, approving, and/or releasing executive session minutes. Those are the matters of the executive session. I need a motion to go into executive session at this time.
Motion to go into executive session.
So motion made, is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mrs. Sullivan, it was properly seconded by Mrs. Rivas Mendez. I need to call a roll call vote to go into executive session. Mrs. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mr. Homer?
Yes.
Vice Chair?
Yes.
Mrs. Rivas Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Azak?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
And the chair says yes as well, and we will not be coming back into regular session. Thank you. Members of the committee will go into the typical executive session room.